Joining us now, one of the best candidates the Democrats have put up in a Republican district, Dr. Cameron Webb with us. Dr. Webb, great to have you with us.
Thanks for having me, John. Good to be here.
So, Cameron, let me ask you this. Your district, District 5, Denver Riggleman won this in the so-called blue wave in 2018 where the Democrats took control. He won that by 7 over a pretty good candidate, Leslie Cockburn, had her on my show a couple times. And I read her book, one of the only people that actually did read it before criticizing her, FYI. Also, Tom Garrett, 2016, when Trump was on the ballot, won by 17. So at best, this looks like R plus, 15, something like that. How do you win, Dr. Webb, in a district that on paper is very red with Trump on the ballot?
Well, I think you win in a district like this by just not being a traditional politician of any sort. And I don't know how many Democrats have worked in the Trump White House or how many Democrats show up on your show regularly. And like I said, I'm happy to have conversations with folks no matter their political ideology. So I think it starts with just engaging with folks, having real conversations, and being willing to listen to a range of views and to engage with a range of views honestly and thoughtfully. So I think that's how it starts. And I think from there, it's just about showing people who you are authentically and doing the work every day. So that's what it looks like to me, and so far it seems to be working.
So this is your first run at political office, Dr. Webb. You're in a tough district, but the Republican nominee, Bob Good, there was a lot of controversy over that convention. Also, he's got some positions that I wouldn't exactly call mainstream. You want to comment on some of those?
Yeah, and I think the first thing is that that convention, I think a lot of people recognize that Congressman Riggleman certainly had an advantage, not just in name recognition, but as somebody whose views were more moderate. I think he appealed to a wider swath of the electorate here. And so, he's somebody who is very libertarian in terms of his streak, and I think that appealed to a lot of people. And I'll be honest, when I decided to run for this seat, I remember thinking, well, Denver Riggleman will be a pretty tough opponent. That'll be a really hard one to flip because of his appeal across lines. If I go to Nelson County, people are like, we may not be in the same political party, but I like Denver, as they call him, because he's people's friend. And I think that was one dynamic. But by really designing a convention to get rid of a pretty likable guy, I think that what they did is kind of shot themselves in the foot, the good campaign. And I think that's the starting point, right? You fracture that conservative base. And like I said, I worked in the Trump White House, so I've seen kind of that spectrum from movement conservative to your kind of, as they call it, establishment conservative. But even still, across that spectrum, when you fracture that base, then it's a jump ball. And I played a lot of sports growing up. So what I'll say is, in a jump ball, it's just about who's making advocacy on the issues that matter to people every single day. You mentioned Mr. Good's positions on some issues, and just to be clear, it's just not tenable in 2020 to have really staunch anti-LGBTQ or anybody's individual liberties issues. I mean, it's important to support people's ability to make personal decisions, and I think that's important. We have to be a society that leans into those values, and so I think he kind of skates around the line of kind of those statements sometimes. Sometimes he's more outspoken about being anti-LGBTQ+, but I think that just the same, that's going to alienate a lot of conservatives I know who support those rights, like Congressman Riggleman, who officiated that wedding because that's between those people. That's their decision. So I think that here's what I believe. I believe that Mr. Good is going to have to back off of that bright red biblical conservative statement and sentiment, and he's going to have to become more moderate if he wants to win this district. And when he does that, he's going to have to acknowledge that he shouldn't have taken on Congressman Riggleman in the first place. They have the wrong nominee.
We're with Dr. Cameron Webb. He is the Democrat running for Congress in the 5th Congressional District. He'll go up against Bob Good. This is a district that Riggleman won by 7 over Cockburn in 2018. Tom Garrett won by 17 over Jane Darwin in 2016. So this is a very red district. Dr. Webb, you said you worked in the Trump administration. Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, well, I was a White House fellow in 2016 and 17, and so the White House Fellowship is a mid-career program really aimed to introduce folks to the highest levels of government. And so for me, I'm a practicing physician. I'm an internal medicine doctor, and I was finishing up my my work, my training, and wanted to pop the hood on government some, do some service to my country, and it was actually at the end of the Obama administration, and it was a transition year, so it was kind of a grab bag. You don't know exactly what you're going to get in the latter half of the fellowship, and so in the first half, I worked on healthcare issues in the Obama administration on the White House healthcare team, and also on something called the My Brother's Keeper initiative, which was aimed at improving life outcomes for boys and young men of color. It was a social justice program of the Obama administration. And so when the Trump administration came in, initially they were trying to figure out what to do with me. So for the first couple of months, kind of sat in the hallway without much to do. But what ended up happening was, I would go around and just talk to folks every day, built some good relationships with people over coffee, and particularly folks in the Domestic Policy Council in the Trump White House. And so ended up switching from and this was all within the Executive Office of the President, ended up switching from the Office of Cabinet Affairs to the Domestic Policy Council, worked on the healthcare team. So it was a small team. It was just three of us on that healthcare team in the Trump White House. And then also worked on urban affairs and revitalization with Jerron Smith, who's still there. And he's actually a senior assistant to the, at this point, he's a special assistant to the president, I believe. And so,
Jerron is on my show today at 9:00.
Oh, tell him I said, hey, it's a good friend.
I will. I will tell him that. Great guy.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And so he's my fraternity brother, actually, and he's one of the reasons why I really made some headwinds in the Trump administration. I encourage you to ask him about me, because we actually sat adjacent to each other in the Trump White House. So we got to know each other well. And we had that, I say you get into the whitewater, right? You have those crucible conversations that we as a nation got really good at having at the founding of our nation. That's what defined the Constitutional Convention. Like, we have to have these tough conversations, but we did it in a way that was rooted in mutual respect, right? And it was just, even though I don't agree with you on everything, I'm willing to listen to some of your ideas. You're willing to listen to mine. And so we talked about issues like criminal justice reform or education reform and the ways that our society could move forward. And I listened to Jerron's perspective growing up in Cleveland, and he listened to my perspective growing up in Spotsylvania County, right? Very different backgrounds, but at the same time, there was a mutual respect there. And then I also started working on drug pricing work with the Trump administration, and leaned into working with some folks from the Bush 43 administration, bringing them in to help guide our work on drug pricing. So I was in the mix. I was doing some work, and like I said, you mentioned Jerron's coming on. Like I said, just if you get a second, ask him about kind of the work that I did, because he was a very thoughtful guy, and I'm glad that he's still in the White House there, because he's just an outstanding guy.
Cameron, I'll do that. You're on the John Fredericks Radio Network. We're with Dr. Cameron Webb. He's the Democrat running for Congress in District 5. That's the Lynchburg area. It's a huge district. Denver Riggleman represents it now. He got ousted in a rigged convention by Bob Good. By the way, ladies and gentlemen, we've invited Bob Good on our show. He isn't going to come on, so whatever. Anyway, Dr. Cameron Webb with us now, the Democrat running for that. Let me just ask you a couple things here, Cameron, straight up. And it's like deja vu, because I've heard this all before. No offense meant. But I had Abigail Spanberger on my show in 2018 multiple times telling me, I'm a different Democrat. I'm going to work with the Trump administration. I'm not going to be a Pelosi sycophant. I'm going to be open-minded. I'm going to be a moderate. Wrong. She's voted with Pelosi 100% of the time, right down the line. Elaine Gloria, District 2, beat Scott Taylor in 2018. We heard the same thing from Elaine. She's going to be independent. She's going to talk to people. She's going to get both sides. She's going to work with the Trump administration. Wrong. She did nothing and voted for Pelosi, including impeachment, 100% of the time. So, Cameron, no offense meant, but I've heard this now 2 times in the past. Now I've got you telling me the same thing. What is going to be different about Cameron Webb that I heard from Abigail Spanberger and Elaine Loria, who said one thing and then did the opposite?
Well, I can't speak to the way that they've engaged with you, or the way that they've held out their role. I know the district that I'm aiming to represent, though. I'm from Central Virginia originally. My wife's from the South Side. She's from Appomattox County. I've been in this part of the Commonwealth my entire life for the most part, except for when I was in my training. And I think that what that tells me is I have a pretty good feel for the folks that I'm aiming to serve. Not only that, but I take care of patients in this district. And so I see up close and personal the issues affecting everyday life for the folks who live in this district. And so because of that, that's who I'm accountable to. And this is the same personality of somebody who, worked in both the Obama and Trump administrations. That's not an easy thing to reconcile all the time. But the fact that I can be effective in both of those spaces, for me, it really showed me the importance of being able to engage with people across a range of ideologies. And so at the end of the day, what's most important to me is serving the people who put me in office. And I recognize that they could recall that vote, 2 years from now and choose somebody different. And that's okay. Ultimately, that's who I'm accountable to. It's not political power for political power's sake. It's not, adding to the Democratic majority. It's making sure there's thoughtful leadership and representation here in the 5th Congressional District. And remember, this district is huge. As you mentioned, it runs from Fauquier County down at Danville, so it's bigger than the state of New Jersey. When you have a district
it's bigger than New Jersey,
diverse, right? That big, that diverse, sometimes it's going to come out sounding, more liberal. Sometimes it's going to come out sounding more conservative. Sometimes it's going to be, admittedly moderate. Depends on the issue. Depends on where the people stand. And I think that to me is what I'm always listening for. I don't like to, fit into partisan boxes or ideological boxes, because for me, I'm coming from taking care of folks with diabetes, right? Like, I'm not coming from this political upbringing or this path in a partisan way. I came into this from working in 2 very different presidential administrations. That's how I came into politics. And so I think that the foundation that I'm building on is one that's admittedly across partisan lines.
All right, so it sounds like you're running as a moderate, yet you're running on the ticket with Joe Biden, who's for the new Green Deal, who's merged his platform with Bernie Sanders, an avowed socialist, with AOC. I mean, these are the realities of the party that you're running under the masthead of, Cameron. I mean, I think you're a great candidate, and I think you have a shot to win for a number of reasons. But, I mean, how do you reconcile your moderate views with the platform that the Democrats adopted here in 2020, especially as it relates to things like the new Green Deal, to defunding police? How do you reconcile that?
Well, I'll take those in turn, because, the way that I reconcile it is when I talk about how I'm running as a scientist. I'm a data guy. I care about evidence. And what's important as a scientist is you don't just pick the evidence that makes you happy or that furthers your point. It's critical when I'm taking care of patients that I look into the range of evidence and make good decisions based on that. So you're speaking to the climate crisis, and you're talking about the Green New Deal and the impact that has. And for me, I don't support the Green New Deal. I think it's aspirational in nature, but I do think that we have goals to achieve with regard to our climate crisis. I do think that the impact of carbon emissions is going to accrue on our planet, and I think that we have to do everything we can. I also think practically that we've got a huge economic opportunity to create jobs in a district like mine, and the cost of clean and renewable energies from a free market standpoint, those are dropping below the cost of fossil fuels. So, hey, sounds like a good idea to move in that direction. Very logical, very rational, very job creating, very much so serves our district. So again, all of that other stuff, putting it under the masthead of a Green New Deal, I'm not interested in that. What I'm interested in is jobs, and I'm interested in avoiding the health consequences of rising climate, and the science tells me that could potentially happen, right? So that's the climate conversation. You see, I approach it from a very pragmatic, very thoughtful, very scientific perspective. The next thing is, you mentioned defunding the police, and I want to, if you'll allow me, John, I want to go on record really quickly, because my opponent has just taken this and run with it. He wants to tell everybody that I want to defund the police, and I think he needs to do his homework. So my father worked in law enforcement for 20 years. My dad worked for the Drug Enforcement Administration. Not only did he hire agents, but he was the chair of the board for the Federal Law Enforcement Training Accreditation Board, and he was that for a few years. That idea of supporting law enforcement, that's part of my family upbringing. That's something that I'm very passionate about. My son told me this weekend that he wants to be a police officer. So the idea that I wouldn't support law enforcement, that's ridiculous. And I think all of the officers who I talk to in this district, they know that's ridiculous. And I was talking to a police chief just the other day, and he's like, I've never gotten that from you, that you're anti-law enforcement. And I was like, that's good, because I've never put that out. The fact of the matter is, the conversation that we're having right now, more broadly, is about criminal justice reform. It's about that idea, these very American ideals, that we should have equal justice under law, and that idea of, well, what does that look like? And if you listen to the Declaration of Independence, we establish justice and then we ensure domestic tranquility. So the idea of justice, that's something so fundamentally American that it's really important. And there are people who feel like that's not being equally dispensed. And I think that there's sufficient evidence to that point. And so on the conversation of defunding the police, that's a state and local decision about how to spend their dollars on ensuring public safety. And that's hard stop. That's what I say. That is the way the Constitution has laid it out. Now, that said, federally, I think it's important to support policing, specifically in achieving goals of more effective policing. And so that's that community-oriented policing, strategies that have been proven to be very effective, that have been, really, really important. And so I think that those are such good opportunities for us to say, hey, law enforcement, how can we be helpful to you? And a lot of the officers I talk to, they say, I would love to be able to live in the community that I'm aiming to police. You want me to do community policing? I need some resources. I need a higher salary. And so the fact that I'm talking about higher salaries for officers, and yet somebody's accusing me of defunding the police, it's just laughable. And that's why I really want Bob Good to debate.
But here's the rub. Here's the rub, Cameron. I mean, I hear what you're saying. I like it, but in the meantime, the Democratic Party in the House of Delegates in Virginia Lee Carter just submitted a bill basically to cut 25% out of the state police budget and $50 million out of all law enforcement so cops can't get raises. The problem you have is reconciling all this with your party's positions, which are the exact opposite, Cameron, of everything that you're saying. So, I mean, that's the thing here where, again, having heard this before, I want to believe what you're saying. I want to go with you on it like I did with Abigail Spanberger. But, I mean, as soon as she got there, it's like whatever Pelosi said, Abigail Spanberger did the same thing with Gloria. That's the if they weren't there and that hadn't happened, your positions would be more palatable to Republicans. But they look at those two candidates and said the same thing and did the exact opposite. All right, let's get to Black Lives Matter. Do you support the Black Lives Matter organization, not the symbol, the organization and the things that are on their website?
To be quite honest, I don't know anything about the Black Lives Matter organization or what's on their website. I've literally never visited it. But what I do support is this idea that we should value Black lives in this country, that there's sufficient evidence, particularly in policing, that there's a disproportionate rate of, the police-involved shootings and killings of Black Americans. And so I think from my perspective, as a Black American, the way that I've seen that Black Lives Matter language used is really in response to watching people die. It's not in response to a website. I can honestly tell you that if you were to poll 100 Americans, 100 Black Americans in particular, 99 of them would tell you they'd never even been to that website. I don't even know what the URL is. So to be honest, I think people use that as a wedge to try to avoid the real conversation, right? And the real conversation is about saying, well, do we want to acknowledge the fact that, hey, this is happening in our society, which is supposed to be the greatest society in the world, and do we want to do the hard work of remedying those issues? And you don't have to remedy those issues by taking anything from anybody else. You have to remedy them by dispensing justice equally. And I think that's where we want to be. So I'm very much so in support of seeing, an end to the police-involved killings. And I think that it's rooted in systematic and structural challenges. It's not because police officers inherently are bad. It's because sometimes, as I've heard even conservatives acknowledge, you'll have a few bad actors who make it look bad. Every officer has said when they watch the video of George Floyd's death, they're disgusted. And they say it makes us look it makes us look bad. It gives us a bad reputation. It makes it harder for us to do our jobs. So the law enforcement officers I talk to, they absolutely want less of that. They want more standards. They want the continued state and local funding to do the trainings necessary to avoid those kind of situations. They want the resources so that they're not responding to mental health crises or homelessness, and instead they're focusing on real policing, whether that's building relationships in communities or responding to the crises that we need, because we need law, we need order. We just don't need disproportionate, impacts on certain segments of the population. We want to be a fair nation, and I think that's what I support. And so, again, any suggestion to the contrary is just fake news.
All right, I got two more quick questions. Joe Biden has said elect me president and I will eliminate school choice. He said, it's gone. It's done. Do you back that position?
That's funny you ask because you have Jerron coming on later, and this was one of our most heated conversations. And by heated, I mean we really got into the weeds on school choice. What I believe is I strongly support the idea of public schools. My mom is a public school teacher. My sister is a public school teacher. My father-in-law, both of my sisters-in-law. And so there was this vision by Horace Mann that it was going to be the great equalizer in American society. It was going to be the way that our society as a whole survives and thrives. I think that the school choice movement, from my perspective, I believe that it's kind of backing away from our commitment to public schools. It's taking that funding and using it elsewhere. And I think that in some ways, parents do want the idea of choosing schools that succeed. But I think that the other alternative is to hold ourselves accountable to making sure that our schools succeed. And so, I think I understand the debate. I understand the argument. But at the end of the day, I'm going to be a really strong proponent for public schools. I grew up in public schools. I did all right. I made it to the 24th grade. I think public schools can be a really strong element in our society. It can be something that can really help lift us because we're trying to compete in the global marketplace. We can't afford to have any failing schools. And I think that by doubling down our efforts on supporting public schools, we can achieve just that. That's what I believe. But again, John can tell you we've had this debate a few times.
No, look, I appreciate your candor and honesty. Final question, Cameron, then I got to wrap. Joe Biden also said, elect me president, no wall, I'm going to get rid of it. How do you stand on that?
I think that the idea of immigration reform, there are a lot of different ways for us to do it. So I think a humanitarian policy is going to be more focused on what's happening at that southern border. I'm not as interested in funding the wall. I think we have better uses for our dollars. I think that immigration enforcement at that southern border can be executed without, building a wall. I think that's a symbol more than anything. And so I think that, again, to me, it's not about building the wall. It's about making sure we have strong immigration laws, and for people who are here, we have pathways to citizenship. Much has been the case since the founding of our nation, and so again, I'm not a huge proponent of the idea of spending our dollars on a wall. I think that if there's a different mechanism for us to hold that line on immigration and make sure that we are a nation of borders and we are a nation of laws, but at the same time, we're focusing more on what's happening with folks who are here, once they're here, who are working, who are contributing to our tax system, the children who are born here. What are we doing to support them? What are we doing to continue, in the very Reagan perspective on immigration, to continue to lean into the greatness that is immigration into this country? That's what I'm interested in. That's the conversation that I think we've botched over the last few years, so let's get back to that.
Cameron Webb, thank you for being with us. Thank you for your candor and forthrightness with us today. I hope to have you back. Just listening to you, you make a lot of sense in a lot of issues. This race is tied. It's going to be very competitive. Your biggest problem with Republicans is not Cameron Webb. I'm telling you, it's Abigail Spanberger. Because I hate to bring it up, but we've heard this all before, and she got in there and did the exact opposite, and now she's going to lose to Nick Freitas as a result of that. So that's the biggest obstacle. You have to convince Republicans in there you're not going to say one thing and then get there and do the Nancy Pelosi shuffle, which is not in alignment with that district. Cameron, though, I appreciate you being on.